I now understand a little more about how deeply critical it is to the future of our like happy civilization and living good lives and getting along and being safe and well fed and comfortable and being able to be generous with each other. Like the value that we all get from technology of today and the technologies of the past that we now completely take for granted. I just find it so magnificent and such a moral good that I'm like even more deeply enthralled with it than I was when I just thought it was cool.
I wanted to hear first more about you. I wanted to hear, like, I've heard both of them say that they have a tough time describing what they do.
Mm-hmm.
And I've found this recently for myself too. It's like, I don't know how to explain what I do. There's a lot of different things. So let's say you and I are sitting next to each other. We're flying out to San Francisco. It's a 3-hour flight, something like that. And I'm really interested in you. How do you describe yourself? Tell me a little bit about how you're describing yourself these days, because you've got some changes happening in your life, which we'll go into. But tell me about like what you say.
Yeah, I used to be a little self-conscious about the fact that what I did was hard to explain, but I've come to see that it's a pretty good sign of being on a frontier of some kind of craft or some sort of knowledge. So probably 6 months ago, I would say I write books, I invest in high-tech startups, and I podcast. As of recently, I've added like a slightly more legible title, which is CEO of Scribe Media, which is a whole story we can get into if you want. It overlaps slightly with kind of the books part of my life, and intertwines interestingly. But the way I think of it is just trying to understand how the world works and what kind of efforts can make the future better. And I pursue that in a wide variety of ways, depending on sort of what I'm interested in and what opportunities present themselves.
So we're going to get into Scribe. We're going to get into your podcast, which is Smart Friends. But you also said you describe yourself as a journalist or author. What would you say? Is there any
author? I think, but I think you know the delineation you made of I build these books. Really, I don't necessarily write them, so I'm never sure what kind of verb to use. But I do go with author on the book publishing side of things.
And then you're doing some investing. I've also heard you say, I think the term was like creator capitalist. Is that correct? Would you ever use that term?
I don't know if I would describe myself that way, but I used it to try to understand the sort of whole movement of people that are both creators and investors in particular. And I think, Jason Calacanis and a prior version of Tim Ferriss and Patrick O'Shaughnessy and to some extent Brent B. Shore, like the mixture of people kind of mixing, Chris Powers for sure, who I know you've had on this podcast. I see it in a ton of different industries, but the mix of building a media business, not just a function, and building like a finance business or a fund or a holding company or something. I just see huge synergies between the two of those. And Creator Capitalist was just a blog post I wrote, kind of trying to like tease out the similarities and see the overlaps and see why that was such a powerful model. So I certainly don't belong on that list at my scale, I don't think, but I'm like, I've got a great podcast and a small early stage venture fund, both of which I love, and talk to founders and scientists and writers and futurists and invest in some of those companies that are working hard to kind of build this, techno utopian future that I see possible. And I just have a ton of fun with all of it, really.
So you went to Michigan State. Did you know, like in college, that you wanted to get into tech and out to Silicon Valley and hang out with some of these, amazing people that,
for sure. Like so my family, and I consider myself like incredibly grateful and lucky to have grown up in a very entrepreneurial family. Like I'm at least a third generation entrepreneur, like fourth if you count farming, which I think you should. And so we grew up, talking about trying to make payroll at the dinner table. That was normal. And so I feel very lucky to have kind of always had my eyes on that as a career path. And even as a kid, I was getting paid to sell candy out of my locker and
Mhm.
give kids rides to school and stuff like that. So I always wanted to be in business. And as I was in college, that's when sort of Facebook started to get really big, and you saw really young people achieve incredible things in technology, and it moved fast and it had an impact, and it became really like sexy in that kind of era. And so I was like, oh, okay, not just entrepreneurship, but like tech entrepreneurship. And it actually took this book, like the Anthology of Balaji, and working on it to more deeply understand the moral good of technology. I was always like, oh, cool. Like that's where young people can have a huge impact right away. That's where I want to work. And I thought technology was cool in the like, oh, this makes Star Wars real, like sense.
Yeah.
But I now understand a little more about how deeply critical it is to the future of our like happy civilization and living good lives and getting along and being safe and well fed and comfortable and being able to be generous with each other, like the value that we all get from technology of today and the technologies of the past that we now completely take for granted. I I just find it so magnificent and such a moral good that I'm like even more deeply enthralled with it than I was when I just thought it was cool. Like that's one of the key things that sort of studying biology has shown me.
So what did you study in undergrad at Michigan State?
My plan, which did not come to fruition, was to do 3 different degrees in 5 years, which was like business econ and this kind of bizarre independent study program that they had that was really cool. That kind of all went out the window when I got an internship at this tech startup that I just never went back to school for my last year.
Mhm.
So that I kind of like haggled myself over the finish line to like get a degree in a bizarre sort of generic thing. So like I technically did graduate, but like I just left school at one point and never really went back. Like didn't go to my graduation ceremony,
Right.
never finished a specific course of study. But I went to a broad set of different classes kind of along the way and just spent most of my time actually in college, like trying to start different companies, like typical college kid companies, none of which were particularly successful. And meeting other entrepreneurs, helping them. Started a student business incubator at Michigan State that's still
Mm.
going called The Hatch, um, and just tried to make a lot of friends among the kind of the community in East Lansing, which was very awesome and supportive. And um, it ended up being a good education, though nothing on per sort of would have like indicated that I was working, that I was like destined for anything in particular, really.
So I want to hear about how the books came about. I know with Naval, I believe you did a
Mhm.
tweet and it kind of blew up, and you had like 5,000 DMs or 5,000, responses to it.
Yeah.
And he signed on for the book and kind of encouraged you to do it. So I wanted to hear a little bit more about how the Naval book came about, but then
Yeah.
also similarly, like how the Balaji book came about for him to sign on.
Yeah, signing on is probably a strong term. Like we don't have a this is not like an incredible like agreement on paper anywhere.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, the Naval book was like I was kind of between side projects, and I had been following him for 10 years, and I absolutely fell in love with this interview he did on the Knowledge Project, which is Shane
Yeah.
Parrish's
Yeah.
incredible podcast. It was a
Yep.
great interview. I probably listened to it 3 times over the course of 2 weeks. And
Mhm.
there's so many ideas in there that I was just like, this is absolutely timeless, incredible wisdom, man. This is like, I want everybody I know to read this. This something in this podcast could benefit everybody on the planet. And podcasting is like this kind of weird subculture. Like I still love it to death. It's growing like crazy, but it is nowhere near the cultural influence that books have or the
Right.
sort of global access that books have. And it occurred to me that all of this value that Naval had created in basically on Twitter and in podcasts was these very like ephemeral mediums, right? Like it was going to slide into dust, digital dust before too long. And I really wanted to preserve that and capture it. So I came up with a terrible name title, like there was just a pun, the Book of Knowledge. and a little like survey and tweeted it and went to bed and woke up to find, 5,000 people had responded, and Naval had retweeted it, which is why, and responded with, happy to support, provide whatever you need, go for it. And that went from me thinking like, oh, cool, I'll spend, a few weeks or a few months like assembling his best ideas into like a little PDF that I'll put on the website, into like, oh my God, I'm writing Poor Charlie's Almanack for Naval. And so I spent 3 years like meticulously categorizing every good idea Naval had ever shared in public. And my first version of the manuscript was like 600 pages, which I was fascinated by every page, but I shared it with some friends and they were like, I got to be honest, I didn't read the whole thing. I'm like, okay, got it. We'll do some editing. So it just kind of pared it down to what I thought was the most widely applicable, most evergreen ideas, which is what made it in the final book. And everything else is like kind of bonus material on the website. So it's still available. But that was, and the response to that book is just so far beyond my wildest expectations before we published it. It's translated into 40 languages, sold hundreds of thousands of copies. Like it's reached every corner of the world by now. And millions of people have read the free version online. It's huge. And that has been a huge inspiration for continuing on that and realizing that the format and the medium, that people really responded to something that was that well curated, that sort of dense and rich with insight. This feeling that you're reading 10 years of knowledge distilled into a book rather than one idea that's been expanded to fill a book. I love seeing highlights on every page and dog-eared, tattered, ratty, dirty copies because people have been carrying it around in their bag for 2 years and read it 5 times. And, those are my favorite kinds of compliments or stories to hear about the book. It's just like, I highlighted every page. I've read it 4 times. I've gifted it to 10 people. That's incredible. It's exactly what I wanted it to feel like for people.
I want to hear how publishing the book and having it come out into the world has changed your life. I mean, it's had to have been life-changing.
Yeah, I mean, the books have this incredible prestige associated with them in a way that I totally did not appreciate. And even though, it seems obvious to me, all of the good ideas in that are Naval's, but just being known for a piece of work that people appreciate and resonate with just makes so many more conversations possible. And people are just excited to meet you and reach out and, let you invest in their company or like want to hear what you have to say. Want you on their podcast. Like I have a suspicion that's why I'm here. So it's a really interesting thing. And, this start is where the story starts to overlap with Scribe. I used Scribe, which is a professional publisher, the first professional publisher, the biggest and the best, in my opinion. And Tucker Max is the founder of that company and really helped and encouraged and supported me and through that publishing, because I didn't know how to publish a book. I'd never even approached it before. And so I had a lot to learn about every little detail, technical, and how the industry worked and the finances of all of it and the rights and the publishing process, book marketing and all this. And he was really, really helpful for me. And I mean, that book changed my life, not just sort of reputationally, but also creatively. The process of seeing how something goes from idea through the maze to publication and then being received in the world, but also financially, in part because by going through Scribe, kept all of the rights and all the royalties to that book. So I took all the financial risk to get it published, but I obtained or kept all of the financial upside, which is not the case with traditional publishing. And I'm not sure traditional publishers would have ever touched this book anyway. They might have insisted on all kinds of different terms, that didn't fit what we were trying to accomplish. They probably wouldn't have let us give it away for free online and reach, another couple million people. So Scribe absolutely changed my life, and the team and all the help that they gave me to make that first book successful was, I feel like I still still owe them a huge thank you for that. And I know there's 1,000 other authors that they've done that for now too.
Yeah, we'll get into Scribe here later, but I wanted to hear, you mentioned Poor Charlie's Almanac, and that's another one of my favorites. You know, it's
Yeah.
always on my coffee table. It's like something I look at frequently.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about, I know that that was an influence. What are some other books that had an influence on how
Mm.
you wrote and formatted Naval's book and
Yeah.
Balaji's?
Yeah. It's one of these classic, like, you can see the dots in the rearview mirror, like once you understand the
Yep.
moment that you've arrived at. So I read a lot of Buffett and Munger books. I think
Mhm.
Peter Bevelin's books are amazing. Seeking Wisdom, All I Want to Know
Yep.
Is Where I'm Gonna Die, So I Don't Go There. Just
Mhm.
the longest small word title ever. Principles by Ray Dalio, Zero to One, The Letters of Warren Buffett. And a lot of those are compilations, I guess, is kind of the subgenre that you would put them in. Like someone took all the value or the best quotes from Charlie and Warren's annual meetings and like stitched them together into this dialogue, or Blake Masters taking notes from the class that Peter Thiel took at Stanford. That's actually what turned into Zero to One. And I remember reading Principles by Ray Dalio, and he says in there, like, I wish more people wrote their version of Principles when they retire. Like, here's all the big ideas of my life and what made me successful and what I think I figured out. And I was like, man, I wish that too. Who do I
Mhm.
wish had written that? And the first person that came to mind for me was Naval. I think he's a unique success story. He's extremely, I don't think he would say this, but I think extremely self-made. He
Mhm.
arrived as an Indian immigrant at like 10 years old, maybe younger, single parent household, like, and turned into this incredible success, not just financially, but I think, emotionally, maybe spiritually, whatever you want to consider it. He's widely admired and respected. Um, and I think I don't know, there's so much to be gained by studying some of those people who you admire in whole, right? Not
Mhm.
just spiky people who are really good at one thing. But that's always why I've been you know, drawn to Munger, even I think more so than Buffett, is just the holistic nature of his life and his approach and his thinking. Um, and I think, to me, Naval fits into that as well.
You had you had mentioned the Shane Parrish interview that I've also listened to a ton of times, and the
Yeah.
start of that interview is just Naval going through his Kindle, like, talking about all the books
Yeah.
that he's
Yeah.
read or reading, or he's got an interesting, way to read. Like, I think he's got a lot of books going on. If it doesn't interest him, he has got no problem stopping it and moving on.
Yep.
Um, but I know with the Balaji book and Naval, like, one of the things I first go to, and I don't know if anyone else is like this, is the books they recommend.
Yep.
So, I love that you've put those together, both the for Naval and Balaji. I wanted to hear, like, for both, if there were any, like, start with Naval, but, like, what are some of the books that he's got listed in the back that have made a big influence on you?
Oh, interesting. So there's definitely a lot that I had already read that I was so I don't know if relieved is the right word, but like gratified to see him recommend
Yeah.
also. It just gives me
Mhm,
the sense that like, you know, my curriculum so far had been like on point. It's like, okay, if
mhm,
we share these books in common, and Poor Charlie's Almanac was definitely one of them. Um, his whole all the kind of like mental model reading was stuff that I had at least in large part done and appreciated and enjoyed. Some of the business stories or biographies that he recommended, um, where I had no experience really on like the philosophy or spiritual side of what he had
mhm.
recommended. Um, and I think that's a really interesting. I still am not honestly not super deep in those things. He was 10 years in by the time he's making these recommendations, maybe more. Um, I have picked up some of the fiction that he recommended, like great taste in sort of really high concept science fiction. Ted
Mhm.
Chiang's Exhalation was an
Yeah.
amazing book that I read on his recommendation. Um, the Egg is a short story by Andy Weir that I reread maybe once a quarter, and it blows my mind every single time. I find it to be, I don't know, the most beautiful thing you can read in 10 minutes. It's incredible. So it's pushed me kind of in a lot of directions there. I think he and Balaji both recommend The Sovereign Individual, which I have read a good chunk of. Just the basics. I mean, Naval gives us like permission to go reread the basics of physics and math kind of constantly, which is a thing I think people tend to feel like, oh, I need to read the newest thing or the most complex version of what I can grok. And he's like, no, man, I've gone back and read, Richard Feynman's 6 Easy Pieces, like constantly. Right. Like you can't remind yourself of the basics too often. And he's done some great interviews with David Deutsch about the beginning of infinity and breaking down just the theory of knowledge, generally all of David Deutsch's work. And those are great conversations. Some interviews with Brett Hall, who's the guy who runs the Talkcast. And that's you can spend a long time unpacking those. And I'm still in early innings of those, but trying to wrap my head around that, because I do think those are very important ideas. And the more we can compress and share those with people, I think that, the more people are going to understand what sort of understanding and actions have positive impacts on the future. And that's an important seed to plant.
So you broke down Naval's book into wealth and happiness, basically. And one of the things before the interview started, I was kind of rereading my dirty copy of Naval's book here. And he's got there's one point where he talks about like desire being in the way of happiness. And I wanted to kind of dive into that idea a little bit, because we're taught like we need to have goals. And Balaji, even like in his book, talks about the importance of having goals. And I think, there's desire behind any goal. So I kind of wanted to get your thought on that desire is in Naval's in the way of happiness, or it blocks happiness to some degree. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, it's a little bit of a nuanced thing. I mean, the foundational idea is a Buddhist idea, right? And what Naval suggests is that there's really a gradient of, how many desires you allow into your life and how many you choose to pursue, right? The monk approach is like eliminate all desires and that extreme version of happiness. There's the other extreme is have every desire and chase all of them all at once. That is unlikely to lead to happiness, because it's just so easy to add desires, especially in this day and age. It occurs to me, like having read that now, that Instagram is basically the most perfect desire generation engine that you could possibly invent if you set out to create a desire generation engine. So I deleted that from my phone immediately. So it's a really, the question you ask yourself is like, for any given desire, like, do you really want to let it into your mind, into your heart? Are you willing to be unhappy until you achieve this desire? And that the answer can be yes for any that you choose. Just be very deliberate about which you choose. Maybe don't pick more than one at a time, maybe two, because they have a really high cost. And once you identify that, you can start to feel it, and you can start to be better about letting go of desires that don't suit you, or that are just obviously not going to come to fruition in the near term. The other hack, which is, I don't know if I've ever heard him articulate it this way, but I think, people like Jerry Seinfeld or Kobe Bryant, some of the greats, is like, I transformed my desire for long-term greatness into a desire to do the work every day. And so, Jerry Seinfeld's like, if he writes a joke every day, he's happy. Like he's constantly working towards that, but knows it's a short feedback loop to happiness, to desire creating happiness. But for any given desire, just choosing, are you willing to, is it easier to let go of this desire or easier to attain it? And being willing to make that trade-off, knowing what it costs.
Hey everyone, I just wanted to take a quick moment here to tell you about this premium superfood shake I have recently fell in love with called Kachava. Kachava is made from plant-based ingredients to power everything you do and help you feel amazing. In every serving, you get a balanced blend of superfoods, nutrients, plant-based protein, adaptogens, antioxidants, and so much more. As if that wasn't enough, Kachava also tastes amazing, and it's helped them earn tens of thousands of 5-star reviews. It's creamy, smooth, and it comes in these 5 delicious flavors. To make it, all you have to do is add water and a little bit of ice with 2 heaping scoops of your favorite flavor. Then shake it or blend it and have it ready in seconds. Personally, I like to drink Kachava as a quick and easy breakfast, or even as an afternoon snack when I'm craving something healthy to help me fuel my workday. I'd encourage you to give it a shot too, because they have a love it guarantee, meaning that if you don't love it for any reason, you can just get your money back. We Study Billionaires is thrilled to partner with Kachava as they're offering our listeners 10% off for a limited time. Just go to kachava.com/WSB. That's spelled KACHAVA and get 10% off your first order. That's kachava.com/WSB.
Yeah, to me, it seems like Naval is more and more getting into kind of like the philosopher role in many ways. And, certainly wealth is important and it provides a lot of optionality. But correct me if I'm wrong, but doesn't he kind of say, like, here's the path to wealth? It's not going to do it for you, but like you probably won't listen. So here's the path.
Yeah.
Is that accurate to say?
I think the last tweet of the famous tweet storm was, when you're wealthy, you'll realize wealth wasn't really what you wanted, but that's for another day.
Right. So let's go into that. What does he mean by that?
I think the more that's a little it's a quip that is, I think, meant to like leave you bleeding a little bit.
Yeah, right.
But
Sure.
the more pertinent idea, I think, is, or the more useful is, the money only solves your money problems.
Yeah.
Like, by all means, go get rich, right? Like, it's, Naval says it's something along the lines of, like, it's easier to just achieve your material desires than to try to eliminate them in the modern world. And for some people, some of the time, which goes back to which desires do you want to choose? But money only solves your money problems. Like, you might work for 30 years to get rich, reach some arbitrary number that you decided is what rich means, and then find out that money does solve some of your problems, but it's maybe 20% of them. It's not going to make you fit. It's not going to make you happy. It's not going to give you internal peace. It's not going to give you good relationships. If you're really deliberate with how you use it, and you already sort of built the skill of chasing those other paths to happiness or solving those other problems in your life, like, money can be a lever to it. You can hire a personal chef, you can hire a personal trainer, but nobody can make you fit. Nobody can therapy you into having a great relationship with your spouse or your kids, no matter how much money you spend on it. So you do have to also address those problems directly in ways that money is never going to be able to achieve. So I think finding that balance in your life and remembering that there are problems outside of money problems, and tackling those with the tools that they deserve.
Yeah. So I heard you talk a little bit about the process of writing Naval's book, and it sounded like you just put everything into a Google Doc. And I mean, it was a long process. I wanted to hear if, like, that process stayed the same with the Balaji book. Did it become easier to write the second book? Can you talk a little bit about the second book with Balaji and the process?
Yeah. Something that I think, the tools are not glamorous. I will say that up front. Like, it doesn't take anything more than Google Docs to write a great book. The second book was really, I feel like I'm better now at the craft of curating and the craft of stitching these things together. I know more what the work feels like. And there was certainly less what I'll call creative doldrums or like difficult crossroads along the way. Like, the first book, I had no idea what the finished product would look or feel like, even the scale it should be. There was times when I wasn't even sure it was going to be a book. And so this setting off on the second book and having, like, I understand this person, and I understand sort of how the finished product is going to feel, and a little more about what it feels like to walk the maze along the way. There's still a lot of uncertainty around what's the final structure going to be, what are the big ideas that will emerge. And it's a very organic process of consuming absolutely everything, trying to organize it, collecting the pieces, sort of shifting them around. And the best analogy is doing a jigsaw puzzle to me. Like, you have to collect the pieces, you have to craft them, you have to organize them, and you have to experiment in different sort of formats to see what things come together. Have early peer readers sort of give you input, sand and polish all the different things so that it reads very consistently and ideas flow into each other and naturally answer the question that emerges in your head. Like, I think that's where you hear that people are like, oh my God, I read this in one day. Like, I did not put it down. You're like, that's awesome. And to me, that feels like we succeeded in creating a really strong through line of idea and idea, question, answer for the reader. And hopefully a lot of that sticks. But yeah, it was a really, I feel like I leveled up and did my job better in this book for sure. His Balaji is different than Naval. The ideas are different. The audience will probably overlap, but not fully. This book airs much more on the side of entrepreneurs, technologists, builders. It's a little more of a handbook to go get out there, get to work, a little less philosophical. But I think they go together really well. And I actually think that this book answers a lot more of the tactical uncertainty people might have had emerging from the Almanack of Naval, of like, okay, I understand that leverage is important. I understand I need to build specific knowledge. I know, I want to end up with equity in a business in order to become wealthy. Okay, what direction do I head now? And this is there's very tactical stuff in here about finding new platforms, thinking about the technologies that are going to emerge, ideating for new companies and validating them with early customers, and seeing which markets are going to emerge into being the biggest and where the opportunities arise in your industry or for your business. So I do hope that some of the stories from this turn into people being like, I applied this, I started a company, it is successful, here we go.
Yeah. I wanted to take a step back a little bit, and for our listeners that just aren't familiar with Balaji yet, how did you get intrigued by him? What was it about his ideas that you decided to write your second book about his ideas? A little bit about his story as a person.
Sure. Yeah. He's somebody I've been following for a long time as well. He's become very well known in Silicon Valley and sort of the frontier tech people in general. He's early to crypto. He's actually was the CTO of Coinbase for a while, because a company that he founded even before that was acquired by Coinbase. He was a general partner at Andreessen Horowitz. And before that, he was the co-founder of a clinical genomics company, because he's got I forget the exact degree, like a master's in chemistry and a PhD in, I think, computational biology from Stanford. So he has had was in biotech, then VC, then crypto, and he's an investor, he's a futurist, he's a writer. He's done a lot of different things over the years, and he's very much a polymath, right? Investor in hundreds of companies. He was, I think, became much more widely followed for being one of the first people to kind of see what was emerging in the beginning of the COVID pandemic and being like, guys, we got a problem here. Look at these exponential curves. I know the chemistry of these viruses and how they work. We've got a real problem on our hands. Certainly early investor in cryptocurrency and a big believer in sort of making space for technology to flourish and for allowing technology to drive progress forward, right? Which is a lot of where the ideas, he wrote The Network State, which became a bestseller. And that's really the driving force behind a lot of his work, is just how can we use technology to make the future better? And how can we change, the structure of our politics and our institutions to enable that? Because we've lost a lot of what made today great has changed, and we what was a tailwind has become a headwind, I think, in a lot of cases.
I want to dive into a little bit more just about Balaji as a person. You've done
Mhm.
hours and hours and hours of study of him and his writings. Talk to me just about just a few ways that he like lives, thinks, acts differently than the average guy, because he's a different class of human being.
Yeah, yeah, and people are like, it's easy to get intimidated, I think. Like, I've heard
Yes.
that a number of times of
Yes.
like, people have trouble, like, bringing him down to earth or
Yeah.
applying what he says or, following the thought pattern, and, yeah, I mean, he is, like, keyed up. He talks fast. He has
Mhm.
deep, obscure references. He often, like, explains something in order to explain something,
Mhm.
which, like, loses a lot of people. Um, but I think at the core of it, I mean, he's a really, really smart guy. You can see that through his entire career. He's incredibly high horsepower. Um, and he spends a lot more of his mental energy extrapolating than distilling. That's something I noticed, like, working with Naval. He's got these killer, like, 4 to 10 word things that are so memorable that just stick
Right.
with you forever, right? And Balaji has some hooks like that for sure, but he spends so much more time explaining the second, third, fourth order effects of his ideas or a problem that we see, and his ideas cover a really wide swath of modernity, and it spends a lot more time on contemporary issues. Um, and to me, what I hope this book does is sort of is just do the distillation work, is show the most fundamental key ideas, the most applicable, the most evergreen ideas that Balaji has shared, and give you the seeds of his worldview, right? Like what Mark Andreessen says of Balaji, which I think is a really interesting, like, fair critique or context, I guess, to provide, is like, when Balaji's wrong, it's because he over extrapolates. Almost everybody on earth, when they're wrong, it's because they under extrapolate. Balaji is somebody who takes an idea to 11, even though maybe reality only takes it to a 5 or a 6. But through that lens, it's really interesting just to see how he thinks, see where the world could go. And maybe you'll arrive at a different conclusion, and maybe you'll stop extrapolating at 4. But without seeing him take it to 11, you might not have made it past a 2, right? So just
Mhm.
seeing somebody who spends so much time thinking so far into the future about all the different crazy possibilities, I think is just a really helpful, interesting mental exercise. And it's helped me see podcasting differently, even like some of the basics of that. You start to just pattern match once he gives you some of these mental models and stories, and you apply them in your own world, and maybe it help you see around a corner or two.
So you mentioned the podcast. How has it changed how you think about your podcast, Smart Friends? You've
Yeah.
interviewed Balaji. I know I would be massively intimidated by interviewing him. I notice that he'll ask you questions like, have you heard about whatever he's talking about? And it's like, nope, I haven't
Yeah.
actually.
Yeah. I don't think he's expecting you to say yes. For
Right,
most of
right.
the French
Hmm.
Revolutionary War,
Yes.
specific battle. Well, it's the perfect
Hmm.
metaphor for this thing that I need to
Right.
explain. Um, so yeah, he's like that in conversation too. Like, we've gotten to talk, sort of offline, and what you hear on a podcast is exactly what you get in real life, right? And
Mhm.
I think he's got a real gift for, and partly where those references come from, is he's a deep student of history. You mentioned the book recommendations, and this book, just like Naval, the whole last chapter is book recommendations that show you kind of the foundation of his worldview. And a huge part of that list, maybe the biggest piece of it, is history. And so Balaji's read a lot of history, which I think is it's a good inoculation against sitting here in the present and thinking that the present or the near future is going to be just like the recent past, right? And when you're a student of history to the degree that Balaji is, you're like, man, all of these people at all these different turning points of history woke up on Tuesday and were like, yep, today will be just like yesterday. And one day they were just so wrong, and a revolution happened. An archduke was assassinated. Like, a pandemic started. Crazy things happen all the time. The government started repossessing, assets, or there was a coup, or the history is just full of these crazy, unpredictable things. that there are patterns to, and a fair kind of response to Balaji is like, there's doom and gloom. He's just predicting different disasters. It's like, yeah, because he's studied history and seen how often different circumstances have led to crazy outcomes, and he is often right about the risks and assessing them. And these are all very complex systems. It's really difficult to have any specific prediction turn out to be true. But I think it's a helpful lens to have on the world to see all of the different setups and all the different outcomes that have happened throughout history, and just get a little more appreciation for the breadth of consequences that different actions or different scenarios could put forth. Obviously I haven't read all of the history that he recommends in there. He's, decades ahead of my reading list. But even if you just pick a few or read synopsis, go read the Wikipedia page of the thing that the book is about, you'll start to see, I think, a little more of what he sees in the world, for better or worse, and maybe be a little bit more prepared for your life, your business, your future.
Yeah, so I was fortunate enough, you sent me an advanced copy of the book, so I got to spend some time with it. So thanks for doing that. I really enjoyed it. Like the last week or so, I've been spending a lot of time with it. So you broke the book down into 3 parts. The first one's on technology. Second one is on truth. And then the third part, which was my favorite, was about building the future, building a company, building a new country or a nonprofit or, but I wanted to touch on just some big ideas in each section. And the one that stood out to me in the first part was transhumanism. And I hear him talk about transhumanism a lot, but explain to me what that is, because I'm not sure I exactly understand it, but it's an important concept to him.
It's an important concept to him. And I think the definition that's in there is very simple. Transhumanism is self-improvement with technology. And
what does that look like?
In that sense, so the transhumanism of the past would be like boats, planes, writing, computers, bikes, learning to ride horses. Like the entire tech tree could be seen as transhumanism of the past. What are things that we can use that are more than like just the hands that we were given as evolved monkeys, to increase our capabilities, right? And people, I think today, you hear transhumanism, and people have this sense that, like, which is bizarre. It is absolutely bizarre when you see the full evolution of time, but they have this sense that, like, wherever they were born is the correct amount of technology to have, and that any new technology is scary and unnatural and unsafe and insane and should be illegal.
Right.
But thank God we have planes. Thank God we have vaccines. Thank God we have open heart surgery. Thank God we have air conditioning. So all of these transhumanism is just self-improvement with technology. And I think that's a really helpful way to see it. There are some, he's got a long list of them in there, sort of near-term opportunities for really crazy capabilities to get added, right? Externalized memory in our computers now. We could have AI partners. We could have robotic help. We can have self-driving cars. And people might be excited or fearful about any set of those, but you can't deny that they are adding to the set of human capabilities pretty quickly.
He talked about having a dashboard instead of like looking at your phone right off the bat, scrolling through Twitter, looking at your notifications. He talked about having a dashboard that would monitor your like health, wealth, truth. Those are like I think the 3 aspects that he said were most important, right? Like first pursue truth, then health, then wealth. We often get that backwards. So talk to me a little bit about the dashboard idea.
Yeah, I think the whole middle section, truth, is really an interesting sort of weave between the different types of truth that there are, like fundamental physical truth, social consensus truth, economic truth, and how the media that we are used to using, whether it's traditional media or social media, tends to distort that truth and make it more difficult for us to find fundamental reality. And that's the role of media. That's its job, but it's grown to take over a huge percentage of our lives. And there are people who live in this absolutely unreal world created for them by social media,
Yeah.
And how they choose to interact with it. And his point, I think, is rather than open, an algorithmically derived set of the most triggering things that, the engagement bait that you can find or that the algorithm has found for you every morning that are someone else's priorities, perhaps the most important thing to do is wake up and look at, for me, it's like my Whoop, it's the resting heart rate variability, basically how healthy, how good were my habits yesterday? How well rested am I? How ready am I for the work that I have to do today? Where are my personal finances at? Where's my budget? Which not everybody looks at daily, but are you tending to the things that are in your house, in your yard? Are your relationships strong? Would be something that if you could quantify in some sense, and there was like a little red alert going off that's like, hey, yeah, you worked pretty hard yesterday. Like, how's your spouse feeling? Like, how many minutes did you talk to them yesterday? Are the things that you really, are your true priorities reflected in how you are using your time both yesterday and your plan for today? I think that's the dashboard that, you can imagine, you could draw it out on paper. Like, what do I wish I had a report on every morning? And a lot of that's yet to be built, but the technology for a lot of it could be there. And just replacing, maybe a bad habit with a good one will trigger some different changes in how you use your time.
Yeah. So the third section is building the future. I think that was your favorite section as well. So
yeah, I think I said in my intro, the first section is the most important, but the third is my favorite.
Yeah. So let's go into some of the bigger ideas in the third section, which was how to build a future.
Yeah.
He's got a lot of great ideas in there about just building a company that can be applied to almost anything.
Yep, building a country. That's really the foundation of the network state. I assume that's the ultimate goal of most people in real estate, right? Is like, go start their own country, own the whole thing. Yeah, triple net land. Yeah. It's so the building the future section is broken up into three sections, which is like sort of the internal game of the mindset and how to think and how to prioritize and determining what the best opportunity is for you. And then founding, which is just, every verb from starting your research all the way through sort of executing and surviving as a company and enshrining that legacy. There's a lot of messy stuff in between. And Balaji's got, I think, a really uniquely sort of rigorous, quantitative, like strict approach basically to navigating that messy piece. And it's, I think he's been a huge asset. He's invested in hundreds of startups, many of which have become incredibly successful. He has started a few of them himself and is very much an in the trenches kind of founder. So I think there's a lot to be gained from that. And actually, I have sent those chapters to a lot of founders that we invest in. I'm like, hey, or friends even who are just starting companies, like, hey, this is the clearest framework I've seen for how to go from, 0 customers to a bunch of customers pre-committed to features you have not yet built with a prioritized list of features and revenue like expectations attached, which is a really helpful framework to have when you're trying to go from 0 to 1. And he taught a course. A lot of that material is from a course that he taught at Stanford for founders and technical founders. I think 250,000 people took that course online. It's an open online course. And some of the technical information is outdated now, but some of the ideas are still really key. And I compiled all those into the course notes in a PDF. If you want the full context version, that's on the website, the book website, BalajiAnthology.com. If you want to go deeply into that. But I hope that this is sort of the successor to 0 to 1 in terms of very tactical builder's manual. That's what this section is really meant to be. So if you liked 0 to 1, I think this will hit the spot.
Yeah, I agree. And the book is coming out when? Next October?
October 24th.
Yeah, okay. Well, we're on October already.
Beautiful. Yeah.
I'm
So three.
lost.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
That's
Hopefully,
great.
hopefully it's already out by the time you're hearing this.
It should be. So
Yeah.
I'm excited to get a physical copy. I love physical copies of books, so I'll definitely be getting one. One of the things that I wanted to kind of touch on is Balaji's Bitcoin bet. He's really well known for that.
Yeah.
Talk to me a little bit about the impetus for that bet. For our listeners that aren't familiar with it, a little bit of background on why he made the bet and the specifics of it.
Yeah, this is some of this is definitely over my pay grade, but I will do my best. So this gets to some of the contemporary issues that like Balaji gets involved in. And his view is that we have dangerous levels of inflation sort of coming to the US and impending financial crisis of some sort. Like his view is that the Fed intentionally or unintentionally has like due to the rate changes has really caused trouble for the banks and caused the bankruptcy, the failure of some of these banks like SVB, and is sort of hiding even more inflation in some of these operations. So the Bitcoin bet, in his view, also is another part of the preface, is that Bitcoin is the safe haven for investors to move in a high inflation environment. If USD is the reserve currency currently, which it is, and it's entering this crazy inflation state, which his theory is that it is, then the safe place for your currency is Bitcoin. And that's preferable to, moving to any other foreign reserve currency. So it is, the bet that he made was that Bitcoin would go to 1 million in 90 days, which of course it didn't.
Right.
But it was an incredible publicity stunt. I don't know if he would use those words. It got a lot of attention, certainly. And the narrative that he shared around it was like, I burned 1 million to show you they're printing trillions and to bring attention to the kind of impending crisis. And he's released a lot more nuanced information around that if this is something you're interested in, I encourage you to go kind of dig into. There's a lot on his Twitter. He's released long podcasts about it. There's a lot of sort of macroeconomic and deep financial like analysis and information that goes into it. I'm not an expert in any of those fields, so I'm not the correct person to help you parse it. But it's an interesting rabbit hole to go down if that's of interest to you.
Yeah, it is actually to me. It is a deep rabbit hole and one I've actually gone down myself. So we've got a podcast that I mentioned, Bitcoin Fundamentals. That's great. People can listen to that as well to whatever, it's a controversial thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's one of those where every opinion is interesting in its own way, and you got to kind of collect all the extremes and figure out where your worldview fits among there. And that is something Balaji says. He's like, here's the different in the nuanced communication, which is most headlines don't report, but if you go read his stuff, it's like, here's my expectation of the different possible scenarios, and here's my probability weighting of each of them, and here's what I would do, as a retail investor. If you think if whatever you think is the most probable thing, like here's the set of actions you might take to, protect yourself or your business. It is an interesting rabbit hole to go down, especially for people whose businesses are largely or heavily impacted by interest rates, Fed activities, banking collapse, that kind of stuff.
Right. Yeah, let's we won't go any further into that. That could do a whole show on that. But
I do want to hit my bottom real quickly.
Yeah. I want to go into Scribe, and you've got this new announcement. You manifested your dream job, you tweeted. So talk to me about your next chapter, what you're up to as CEO at Scribe Media.
Yeah, my
and
publisher,
how it came about, like how the whole.
Yeah, I'll do my best in brief. Because it's, we could do a whole podcast on that probably. The publisher that I used to publish my first and the Balaji book, actually, that I owe a huge debt of gratitude to. Went through some financial challenges related to previous leadership and underwent a sale process. And I, as a adoring customer of theirs and a fan of all the humans who I've worked with there, did my best to go support them and make sure that that could remain a stable thing. And I have some friends, we mentioned, who work in permanent equity and private equity and long-term holding companies. And so I just took this opportunity to around to a few of them, and Sieva and Xavier at Enduring Ventures, got excited about the business. It worked a lot with the bank to figure out how this was going to unfold, and ended up sort of in some form of fashion that is not my expertise, like closing on some of those assets and hiring the team, and needed somebody to run it. And I talked with them a lot through the process. They knew that I was a happy customer and had some experience in this industry and some ideas about how to carry it forward, and gave me a number of calls. And so over a few weeks, we talked about it and got excited about the opportunity. So I joined a few weeks ago. I'm new to the company, new to the publishing industry, but I'm very excited to kind of cross the line from author and moving into CEO of this professional publisher. I mean, the professional publisher, honestly. Like they are very well known and respected in the industry, and I think like fertile ground for the next kind of the biggest new age publishing company out there. I see that the world has changed around traditional publishing, that the kind of offer that Scribe provides authors, the chance to own their full financial upside, all their creative rights and decisions and copyrights, makes so much sense in a world of people who own their own audience, in a world of Amazon being where most books are bought and sold. It's a really interesting shift in an industry that I feel like has not yet fully adjusted. And I'm excited to be digging in.
Eric, this has been really great. I've really appreciated your time today. I hope people dive into both the Naval book and the Balaji book. For people that want to find out more about you, find out about the books, what's the best way for them to learn about you, get in touch with you, that kind of thing?
Yeah, thank you so much for the kind words. I'm really I love to hear that these books have had an impact on people's lives. All of my projects can be found at ejorgenson.com. That's kind of the beginning of everything. You can go any direction from there: the podcast, the fund, the books, the blog. And I'm on Twitter all the time, arguably too much. So if you're on Twitter, come find me. Let's have a chat.
Awesome. Eric, thanks so much for your time today. Really appreciate having you, and best of luck with the Balaji book.
Thank you. Appreciate you very much.
All right. Take care.
You too.
BMP for short, business management price. That's all that matters, and really all that probably ever will matter when you're investing in anything, whether it's a public market stock or, deciding whether to go into business with a friend or open up a coffee shop. It's BMP. It's all that matters.